What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron, and special guest today, Jeremy Freed. Guys, how we doing?
Well, good to be back, Nick.
Jeremy, welcome back to the show. Nick, always a pleasure. And I'm just so hyped. This is Christmas. This is my favorite time of the year. I don't even care. I love the off season.
12 days.
It's getting crazy right now.
Yeah, 12 days until the free agent meetings can actually start. So very exciting. A lot of rumors are dropping. Obviously, a lot of Celtic stuff with Kyrie and Al Horford. But today we're talking shooting guards. Going to preview them. Before we get started, as always, quick reminder, check us out on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube. Also, check out Design Tree / Off the Glass for OTG gear. But let's start off with some shooting guards. And the guy at the top of the list suffered a really bad injury in Game 6 in the NBA Finals, and that's Klay Thompson. Tell me about his game before we break down the injury and how it impacts his offseason.
Well, Klay is, merely staking a case for the best shooting guard in the NBA, let alone the best free agent shooting guard. He's got the number one skill set that a player needs in the NBA these days, which is shooting. He's always been a fantastic three-point shooter and in great volume. And to boot, he's a great defender, making the all-defensive team, I think, this year for the first time. So any team, would be lucky to have Klay Thompson playing for them. He's low maintenance. Seems like a really good teammate, a pretty chill guy. I think even people who don't like the Warriors would have a hard time picking a bone with Klay Thompson. For him to go down with the ACL tear, I think everybody was really disappointed by. And it's going to I think, change his outcome in free agency. I don't think he was ever going anywhere, but you hate to see it.
Yeah, I think Klay Thompson's probably one of the most universally liked guys that we have in the league. And like you said, Jeremy, you hit the nail on the head. He's a fantastic three-point shooter. We kind of forget how good he is offensively because he's kind of been the third guy there behind Curry and Durant. But this is a guy who can create a shot if necessary, can obviously score at will dribbling just 6 times. A fantastic defender, probably an underrated passer to a degree. He's everything you want, as Jeremy mentioned, today's NBA. Yeah,
you guys pretty much nailed it. Obviously, you know who Klay Thompson is. He's been an NBA champion, and it really sucked to see him tear his ACL, especially going into a big year. How does that ACL tear impact his offseason, if at all? Because the rumor is Golden State's going to offer him a max deal regardless.
I don't think anything's really going to change by it, except that he won't be playing basketball in the offseason as he might have. They were always going to offer him the max. The Kevin Durant injury, the Achilles, that has traditionally been something that's much more challenging to come back from than an ACL tear, which, you don't wish it on anybody. But the ACL has a pretty good track record of recovery. So they wanted Klay back. They're going to get Klay back. I don't think he wanted to go anywhere at any point in time. Maybe, healthy he might have considered, playing for his dad's team, the Lakers. But it just seems for all the world like, he was not going to be going anywhere besides Golden State. And Golden State's, game plan is the same, pay him max money, keep him, in now, San Francisco, but at least the Bay Area, for the length of his career.
We always talk about players switching teams. And kind of that there's not a lot of loyalty. Klay and the Warriors, this is a guy they drafted. So I think the intention was to try and keep this core of him, Curry, and Draymond together because this is a team that they built from the ground up. I don't think they ever wanted to lose Klay Thompson. I don't think Klay Thompson, like you mentioned, Jeremy, ever wanted to leave. The Splash Brothers has been the foundation. Obviously, you add Kevin Durant, that's a little bit different, but he still deserves the max. As we know, knee injuries aren't the worst thing to come back from. Obviously, you don't like seeing a knee injury because it generally leads to more, but it is comebackable from. So it made sense.
Yeah, obviously, like you guys mentioned, loyalty from both sides. And obviously Golden State wanted to keep him, especially with the, you don't know what's going to happen with Kevin Durant. Even if he doesn't leave and he comes back, he's not going to necessarily be 100% healthy with a torn Achilles like Jeremy mentioned. So interesting, something to keep an eye on. Do you guys wish sometimes you'd get to see, Kory kind of hinted at this before, Klay Thompson in another situation where maybe he would have more touches and how good he could be?
If he was a different type of player, I think that'd be very interesting. I think he's always been content to play the role that he's played. He doesn't have to be the star. He's content to be 1B to Steph Curry's 1A, I think maybe is a little overkind because Steph Curry really is a revolutionary basketball player in many ways, but I don't think he craves the spotlight like a Kyrie Irving and the need to say this is my team. I think that he's very content with the role that he has, and I don't know that he has been made better than he would be without Steph. I think being on the Warriors has been really helpful to him, but not having as good teammates as he has had, especially in the prime of his career, maybe a little more defensive focus on him might turn him into, a different player. I think maybe there is a potential, next level that he could get to if he was leading his own show, but I don't know, that we'll ever see it, based on the fact that he seems to be, a Warrior for life.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in an expanded role, you would see more from Klay Thompson. I don't think he can be like the number one guy on your team, like a championship team. I think he is kind of the number two guy, just for his skill set offensively. But I mean, there's no way that he couldn't on a certain team average in the upwards of 25 to like 27 points per game in the right situation. The ideal not the ideal, but like I think about the Lakers, for example, with him and AD. Like I feel like that would have been fun with LeBron, those three. But certainly with a bigger role, can score more points.
Yeah, obviously we won't get to see that. I think we'd all agree he'll be back with Golden State this offseason. Now moving on to another shooting guard who could leave his previous destination. That's Jimmy Butler. Not necessarily his best year in terms of statistics, but he stepped up in the playoffs. Obviously his impact is felt on both ends of the floor. What do you like about Jimmy and not like about Jimmy?
I really took issue this past season with Jimmy Butler, team killer. And for a player as good as he is to really detonate two situations, first in Chicago and then Minnesota, that's a tough player for me to want to get behind as far as investing a lot of hard kind of earned free agent dollars there on the part of an NBA team. Obviously, he has considerable talent. I mean, this guy is a 20-point per game scorer. He's good for more or less the better part of a 25-5. He plays really ferocious defense, and is by all accounts really invested in being good. But just the way that he's left multiple situations at this point in the league, and being on the wrong side of kind of 29 here is going to be 30 by the time the next season rolls around. I'm very concerned about how he's going to hold up. I think for all of the things that he brings to a basketball court in terms of his skill set, there are a bunch of things off the court that makes him a really, I think, a dangerous investment in this free season.
So to the skill set on the court, obviously tremendous defender, definitely what he's I think best known for. Can get to the basket, good free throw shooter. The 3-point shot has definitely come a long way from what it was initially in the league. Not something you can rely on heavily. Has hit a lot of clutch 3-pointers, especially with Philly. The first stretch of time there, he was rather big time. Ball handling probably underrated in the fact that he is actually a pretty good passer. And then, I mean, the downside, as Jeremy kind of mentioned, is how turbulent he can become off the floor. Obviously, the situation in Minnesota blew up. I mean, it was great for us, right? I mean, him taking the third stringers and beating the starters, that was all fun in the media. But when things can get that bad that quickly, that's something to worry about. But in Philly, at least, it seems like everybody loved him. It seems like he's back to being like at least a good locker room guy. Again, in my eyes, at least. The weaknesses would just be a little bit of the 3-point shooting, but I don't see a ton of holes. And obviously, him being 30 and already having the knee injury and all the miles that Tom Thibodeau put on his legs early on, that could be a warning flag.
Yeah, I would say the 3-point shooting obviously isn't amazing. He can shoot around league average, and like you said, there is some concern with injury moving forward. Be interesting to kind of see how his impact is depending on which team he signs on in terms of the locker room, because it was interesting how things were so bad with the Timberwolves, but then in Philadelphia, like Kory mentioned, it seemed like everybody loved him and they really want him back, and it seemed like his relationship with Joel Embiid was very good. I'm not sure about Ben Simmons, but I'm not sure Ben Simmons really talks to anybody.
Well, I think the match in Philly was a really good one. I think that Philly is And there is something to the character of a city, I think, matching the character of its team. That's not a blue collar town, quote unquote, but that's traditionally been a sports city that really values hard nosed effort giving players more so than necessarily perhaps finesse talent. So for Jimmy Butler to come there, who obviously cares and obviously works hard on both ends of the court, that's a perfect match in terms of a player and a fan base. And I think that what he found in Joel Embiid that he didn't perhaps find in Karl Anthony Towns or Andrew Wiggins, was somebody who cares as much about succeeding as he did, or as he does, and not someone who's coasting on his natural athleticism. Obviously, for Joel Embiid, he could have collected a lot of money and not worked nearly as hard to get back from all of the injuries that nearly derailed his career. So I think that Jimmy Butler sees, I think, kinship in a lot of the attitudes and mindsets of the Philadelphia roster, that he didn't find, up in Minnesota.
Kory, what do you think is the ideal role for Jimmy Butler moving forward on whatever team he signs with? Is he a number 2 guy? Is he number 3 guy on a championship team? What type of role are you looking at for him?
Some probably between a hybrid between the 2 and the 3, like maybe your second best defensive player or your best defensive player, but then your second or third option offensively. Most likely third. I don't think you want to rely on a game where Jimmy Butler has to go like isolation mode like he had to do in one of those early on games against Toronto. You don't want to have that come out of Jimmy Butler, rely on that heavily. So probably a 2 to a 3 with a definitely a more dynamic offensive scorer ahead of him. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I can agree with that also. I mean, it's very clear that in this NBA, you need multiple guys who can create a shot. And he can, get a shot for himself. But as Kory mentioned, you don't want to have ISO Jimmy down the stretch and have that be, the only course of action. And in many ways, that was, the flaw of that Philadelphia roster, which came as close as anybody did to unseating the, eventual NBA champs. But that, Joel Embiid, being, more of a traditional center, he needs someone to get the ball to him. He's not going to, be able to just, put a team on his back down the stretch. Obviously, Ben Simmons can't shoot, so he has his flaws as far as, what he can do, certainly to create his own shot. But JJ Reddick depends on people to put him in a scoring situation. Tobias Harris wasn't a guy, who could do the same thing. So, he found himself as far as, being tasked with creating primarily for the team, and that's not a role that he's well suited in. I mean, I've heard little whispers of Jimmy Butler to like the Lakers, for instance, and I don't think that that's ultimately where he should go, or that would be the best third for the LeBron Anthony Davis trio. But as far as that set of skills where he doesn't have to be the top defender, but can be a very good supporting defender. Doesn't have to be the top creator, but a very good supporting creator. To Davis and James respectively. I think that that's a good kind of integration of his skill set.
Yeah, it's like you don't want him necessarily the number 1 option for a lot of things. Like he's okay as your secondary playmaker on the floor because he can work and pick and roll a little bit, solid with the ball in his hands, like Kory mentioned early on. Defensively, probably best as your second defender, possibly okay as your first defender. I think if you're a team looking to win a championship, you probably want him as your third best player. If he's your second best player, you want the gap between your second and third best player not to be very big at all. So, they could easily swap for 2 and 3. But what are some possible destinations for Jimmy Butler this summer?
I think there's a very good chance that he, stays in Philadelphia. I think after the way that Chicago blew up and after Minnesota blew up, I think there has to be something to, him really feeling the love. And I think that's important for him. So I could see, him easily, staying in Philly. As much as I don't think that that's ultimately going to be the way that it shakes down. I could see him in LA, with the Lakers. Or with the Clippers. I mean, the Clippers are going to have, a lot of money there too. And I think that, Kawhi might be actually a very good teammate for him if Kawhi ends up heading west. Because, Kawhi does, I think, both the scoring and the defending better than Jimmy Butler does. But that, being the strong silent type, Jimmy Butler's not going to, find himself marginalized there. So I think staying where he is or perhaps heading out west could be, likely locations in either instance for him.
Yeah, I mean, I have Philadelphia on my list as well. It kind of just seems like that's the place to go back to with how things developed between him and Embiid. I feel like they kind of developed a good relationship, as we mentioned. I think the Lakers is still going to be an option. If we hear the rumors, I'm going to put some stake into it simply because they have AD now, and they're going to get these meetings. Do they have enough cap? That's a different question. Will they be able to make more cap? Will he take less? That's a whole different scenario. And I wouldn't rule out either one of the New York teams. There's just been too much noise. I think the Knicks probably are more out of it now with the Durant injury and then probably being out of Durant sweepstakes. But who knows? Maybe they get desperate. They just want to bring in a max free agent, so they try and throw a lot of money Jimmy's way. But again, it feels like he wants to win, so why would he go to the Knicks? And then the Nets would be probably a dark horse, but they have their eyes on much bigger stars.
Yeah, you guys pretty much nailed all the targets. Philadelphia seems the most likely. It seems like if Philly had a choice, they'd bring back Butler over Harris. So he'll probably get his money there, and they can offer him the extra year, if that's the right decision they want to make. But then Lakers, I think, is a possibility. But the rumor is right now that they're trying to open up more space because I think right now they'd only have 24 mil, which isn't close enough. They're trying to get to 32 would probably be enough to nail them. Jimmy Butler. Clippers a good choice. Like you said, the Nets, the original rumor for Kyrie Irving coming to the Nets was Kyrie and Jimmy Butler. So who knows if that has any stake in it, like Kory mentioned. And the Knicks would be low-key dark horse. I wouldn't really expect it. There's been some rumblings about Houston, but that seems almost impossible cap-wise. Like you guys said, I think Philly's probably where he's going to be playing next year.
I would love him on the Indiana Pacers. I'll say that. We have the cap for him, but we probably won't go after him. So I think Jimmy Butler would fit in stylistically with either the Pacers or the Utah Jazz. The defensive-minded first team with him kind of having the ball in his hands more. Not that it would necessarily translate to championships, but I think like those two destinations would be ideal for him.
Yeah, it seems like he may have the interest in playing in a bigger market.
Yeah, that as well plays a huge factor.
Anything else on Jimmy Butler you guys want to touch on?
I think we nailed the Jimmy Butler chat. I certainly hear your points about potential smaller markets. I think that he could do well there. But with larger market options available to him, it does seem less likely that he'd resign himself to something in the middle of the country that way.
And pretty much after the top two shooting guards, everything gets kind of close. There's a pretty big drop off. Obviously, Danny Green's the next one on our list. Obviously, big in the finals, had a career year this year in terms of kind of a refresh, where the last few years in San Antonio, he wasn't so great. He averaged 10, 4, and 1 on 46 and 45, your ideal 3-and-D type of guy. What'd you like about Danny Green this year?
Danny Green is so up and down. Sometimes you think that, he's like the perfect 3-and-D guy. And then sometimes you think that he's unplayable. And sometimes that's, the Eastern Conference Finals and the Finals, or the two rounds that you're talking about there. It almost looked like, he couldn't really even, play an important role against the Bucks. Then he goes and is pretty crucial in terms of a lot of things that he was doing, against the Warriors. It's tough to say exactly, where he'll turn out because of that roller coaster ride there. I mean, he definitely resuscitated his career, after, that time in San Antonio. I'm a little, blown away by, how old he is. It was, a shock to me when I was looking, at, the Danny Green situation to find out. I mean, he's going to turn, 32 in just a couple of days. And that's, shocking to me. I mean, I remember when, the Cavs kind of stole him in the second round all those years ago. I don't know that he's going to be a big ticket item. I think he's the kind of guy that might fill in around the edges nicely, to complete a free agent class rather than certainly being the centerpiece of one.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Green, what he is at this point in his career. He's a 3-and-D guy. Obviously, he's a little bit more streakier than he was probably in his San Antonio days, but he still had a lot of huge shots in that NBA Finals. Almost the costly turnover, but it doesn't matter now because they got it done. But, yeah, Danny Green's going to be a guy that a lot of teams, I think they're a shooter away. The team like the Lakers, for example, maybe even the Warriors, if they're trying to just get somebody who's looking to play for a little bit less to go after another title or to play some in 3. I mean, Danny Green's going to be wanted by half the league for what he can produce and bring to a system.
Yeah, there's always a role for a type of player like that. He's just a really nice complementary player, not necessarily amazing, but he'll give you what you need as your fourth or fifth starter, or even a guy coming off the bench. What are some possible? Actually, what's an ideal role for Jimmy Butler for Danny Green?
I mean, I think what Kory was kind of outlining there is the template for him. He's going to be looking to be either a fourth or fifth starter or a top bench guy for a contender. That's obviously the best role for him. He might be able to make a little more money on a worse team, but to what end? I mean, I suppose he does have a couple rings this year, and he did win one with San Antonio a few years ago. So perhaps he feels he's done his winning and now he wants to make his money. But I think that he can kind of get both done because of the value that a good team would find in him. So Kory mentioned the Lakers. I mean, if the Lakers find their third star at a position that isn't shooting guard, then having Danny Green to provide better spacing and change kind of the geometry of the floor for them, that's a great spot for him. So that sort of situation I think is going to be the one that he will ultimately choose to go to, and that's the one that he should go to. I feel as well.
I mean, when it comes to the role, I think he could be the starter on your team. Probably at this point, he's better off being the sixth or seventh man off the bench, probably. But he can definitely still play starter minutes. We just saw that in the NBA Finals. I mean, teams. I have like 10 teams down. Do you want me to list them all?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I got Philly because if they lose JJ Reddick, maybe they go cheaper to Danny Green.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, how much do you guys think Danny Green's going to get? Because I think this is an interesting number. I've seen all different types of opinions.
Go ahead, Jeremy. You go first.
I mean, when I've kind of been, figuring out in the OTG free agent series, where are people going to, find their money? I mean, something that I always think of as kind of a starting point, and maybe it's a bad one because he's so underpaid, is like if Lou Williams, only got the little contract that he got, which was like 3 for 25 or something like that. He's making around like $8 million a year.
Yeah.
I don't know that any number of even good veterans who are on the wrong side of 30 are deserving of significantly more than $8 million a year. I don't think that those kinds of players are range up into the 10 plus. I don't think they're going 8 digits a season. I think that that's kind of the going rate for a good veteran who can either be a spot starter or a strong contributor off the bench. It's like a little more than that kind of cap exception, mid-level, old mid-level type of range, and that puts you up into 7 or 8. So I could see a 3 for 21 or something like that for Danny Green. I'd think that was out of bounds.
Yeah, the number I had in mind was somewhere between 7 and 10 million. I could see someone giving him 10 and probably regretting that in the last couple of years of his deal. He's probably going to get 3 years, right? Whatever deal he gets.
Yeah, it depends. Someone could overpay for a year or two if they wanted to, just because, hey, we don't want to lock him up long term, but we don't mind paying him for the next 2 years because we'll have our cap open up after that or something like that. So that's something to always consider as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, the on top of the teams I had already, I had the Raptors. I threw in the Rockets and Blazers as well. Obviously, the cap situations for them is tight. But if they were to work around money, Danny Green is the type of player they both, just fits into their systems, being shooting and defense. And I had the Clippers as well, the dark horse, but that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and just to throw out the mid-level exception, non-tax-paying teams, it'll be around 8.6 million, tax-paying teams 5.3 million. So it's a pretty big jump. I would say he would probably get the non-taxpayer unless there was a situation he really loved. If he probably wants money, he's going to go to a non-contender. He's won a lot, but it seems like he'd rather be in a winning situation.
Well, he plays better in a winning situation. I mean, he really is the type of player that makes a bigger difference when he's in a winning situation. His skill set is better attuned, to pushing a great team over the top than making a difference on, a middling team. So I think he realizes. I mean, I was excited, as I said, when Cleveland drafted him. He didn't do a thing in Cleveland. And well, it was, I don't know about. I mean, he was a 22-year-old rookie, coming, out of the second round, so it's not like he would have been, such a big deal. But I think he'd also just, won a championship at North Carolina, so. It seemed like, what a steal the Cavs got in the second round. He barely makes it off the bench, and then three seasons later, he's starting 80 games and averaging 10 plus points for. It's certainly something that it's. I think he knows himself well enough to know that he should play for a winner.
Any other teams you think you throw out there, Jeremy?
That Kory covered a good bunch of them. Depending, I don't know about something like the Blazers. I think their backcourt is pretty well set, but I don't know if he'd be interested in that situation in Indiana. I think where there's a lot of backcourt flux, with people coming into free agency. I think that he would do well in that situation. Providing a little more spacing for Oladipo and some strong defense like they like to play with the Pacers. And by the same token, that we think Jimmy Butler could do well in Utah. I think that Danny Green could do well there. In addition to that, especially because they have a little bit of a non-traditional system. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is a nominal shooting guard, but does a lot of the creation there. Joe Ingles, also does a lot of the creating. Actually, Utah saw some of their greatest success when both their point guards were out, and they weren't really playing, a straight point guard. So that's something where he could, I think, kind of slot into some of the interesting stuff that the Jazz do and find some success there too.
Yeah, like you guys mentioned, there's probably more teams that he'd fit on than not fit on. Anything else on Danny Green before we move on to JJ Reddick?
I think that covers me.
Yeah, I think we're switching over to almost the same exact player with a little bit less defense.
I would say a lot less defense. Tell me your thoughts on JJ Reddick, who averaged 18 a game this season, which was pretty impressive, but his efficiency wasn't as high as normal.
I was a little surprised when I was checking out JJ Reddick. I didn't realize he was pouring it in that much. He's a guy who keeps himself in incredible shape. So even though he's solidly in his mid 30s. I mean, he's going to be 35 in just a couple of days, actually. 18 points a game kind of blew me away, especially with as many good players as he was playing with and as many shots as those guys required. That he got that many opportunities. Not as efficient as you mentioned. He peaked in his 3-point shooting a couple years ago at almost 50%. And this year dipped under 40% for the first time, I think in about 5 years. So not, quite as good a shooter, although still a great shooter by league standards. He just kind of hasn't shown signs of aging. And I don't think he's going to, make the same money that he's made with Philly the last 2 seasons. But obviously can be a very, a considerable sized piece of a winning puzzle, I think, still. Moving forward in the league.
Yeah, I mean, he's had his career high in points per game with Philly, going from 17 last year to 18, or 17 the year before to 18 last year, shooting 8 threes a game from just 6.6 threes in 2017, 2018. They're just using him more. Obviously, the one issue with Philly is they haven't had a lot of 3-point shooters. And JJ Reddick has definitely been their best 3-point shooter, so they give him a lot of looks. They try and go through him offensively at times, getting him loose on screens. You're still getting a very good player in JJ Reddick offensively. As Nick kind of joked when I said you're not losing much on defense, JJ Reddick is not a very good defender anymore. His lateral quickness is not as good as for his age, but there are plenty of teams who need this type of 3-point shooting off the bench. And JJ Reddick can certainly provide that still at the age of 35.
Yeah, and JJ Reddick's one of the players. He's such a great shooter that he provides your offense a little bit of gravity. Obviously, it's not the same as Steph Curry or maybe a JJ Reddick from 2 years ago, but teams pay attention to where he's at because he can light it up in a quarter, drop 3 or 4 threes, and next thing you know, you're down 10. So JJ Reddick's definitely an impact type player. But in terms of his impact, what role is ideal for him moving on to either staying with the Sixers or to his next team?
Well, I think somebody said off the bench. I don't know if he's ready to be moved to the bench. I mean, he might be. We'll see in the fall. Exactly how much that lateral quickness has fallen off. But for what he does, for a team's offense, I think that's still worthy of a starting role, especially in the way that he plays. He's the type of player who kind of like a Rip Hamilton and maybe a Reggie Miller before him is always on the move, running off the screens, really doing a lot to tire out another team's primary wing defender, and to really throw a defensive kind of system into a little bit of flux just through all the activity that he does. So I think that JJ Reddick is still a starter. He's really come into his own in his last few years in LA with the Clippers, and now with Philadelphia. You just don't see the fall off, I think, offensively, to think that he couldn't still start and be an important part of a good team.
I mean, I think there are certainly plenty of places in the NBA that he can be a starter on. And I just think there's certain opportunities if he wanted to go maybe compete for a title in different situations. There's still a 6-man role where he probably plays in the upwards of 28 minutes per game somewheres, as there's a guard shooting off the bench. But I mean, there are plenty of situations that you need that kind of floor space there, as you mentioned, the gravity that he can put. It's not a Steph Curry like, but having a guy like that who's always moving and always a threat from deep is just different for an offense. But I think it just depends on the situation of whether he starts or comes off the bench.
Yeah, I would say probably best role is either fourth or fifth starter, or maybe your 6-man. Not somebody you necessarily need to depend on a nightly basis, because we know he can be a little streaky at times. He can get really hot, then he can be very cold, and teams can kind of attack him defensively a little bit. But what are some destinations if he doesn't re-sign with Philly?
Well, I think depending on exactly what he's trying to accomplish. Again, we've talked about the Lakers need for shooting. Obviously, Danny Green would come, I think, cheaper than JJ Reddick would, especially if the salaries that he's taken home the last few years from Philly are any indication.
What do you think his price tag is?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I was blown away really by what he's made the last few years with Philly. I mean, I think it was, didn't he make like over 20?
Yeah, he made like
year?
24 the 1 year. And I think that was like an outlier because Philly just had the cap space and they just wanted to lock him in, and they wanted to keep the flexibility going to the next year. So that one I think was just more so of like the whole cap situation. They just didn't want to go to waste, and they knew it would be easy to get him on that 1 year deal that was really big. This last year, I think he made around 14 million. That's probably more around his mark. Last year, I'd probably see a little bit of drop off into this offseason.
Yeah, certainly. He's not going to match those numbers, but even being a little older, I think in many ways, if you're talking about who's the premier sniper available in free agency, that's probably JJ Reddick as far as just like a sheer skill set is concerned. I mean, Klay accepted because we don't really consider him a likely party to move, but for JJ Reddick, I think is the premier just like straight shooter. And that'll, put him into double digits again. I don't know for how many years, but again, he doesn't fall off. He's consistently healthy. The past, 5 years is, he turned 30, 78, 75, 78, 70, 76 games, so he's suiting up for you. And staying healthy is a skill set too. So I think that, JJ Redick's going to continue, taking home the bacon.
Yeah, when it comes to money, I could see him making anywhere from 8 million to really like 14 million. Like I could see a team saying, well, you're still a threat from deep. You can still log minutes, as Jeremy mentioned. You've been durable. So I think there is a place where a team kind of just goes maybe a little bit too all in on him, or he could even get a 1 to 2 year deal. I don't think it's out of the question that he signs a short term deal. I'm guessing he's looking to lock a longer one up, being how old he is. But he seemed to have liked to play these kind of smaller contracts if it means more money. But again, it depends on where he ends up too.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, though. With the age, he might be trying to lock up a 3-year deal or just stay somewhere or stay put for a while. He does have a family, so take that in consideration. But who knows? Like you guys mentioned, someone could kind of bait him into taking a 1-year deal if the contract's a little bit hefty. I think think I'd be happy paying him maybe 10 to 12, depending on what role I'm looking for, and maybe on like a 2 or 3 year deal. But obviously, it's going to be interesting because you have all the big fish, and then you're down into probably like the tier 3, and then you start looking at guys like JJ Reddick or end of the line starters or bench players.
Yeah, definitely.
What would be your favorite destination? Do you think it's likely he goes back to Philly, or do you think there's one team that really sticks out?
I think he's a good threat to stay in Philly. I think he likes it there. I think it's a really good role for him. Obviously, he has excelled there. As Kory mentioned, setting new career scoring highs the last 2 years. So I think that he's better respected perhaps than he was before he got to Philly. I think the kind of Duke element of it faded a long time ago. But at the same time, JJ Reddick I don't think was being thought of as any level of one of the best shooting guards or one of the great shooters, and I think now there's a renewed appreciation for him, and I think that comes from the work that he's done in Philly. So in the same way that Jimmy Butler likes the love that he gets from Philadelphia, I think JJ Reddick does as well, and so I think he'd be happy to stay there if the price is right. I think that not to send everybody west to LA, but there's just so much cap space and intriguing players there that I could see him going back to the Clippers as part of the the new Kawhi squad. They have a great young point in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but I don't think that Landry Shamet or Jerome Robinson have shown enough to say that they've locked down the backcourt there. I think that they're probably still looking for another piece of the backcourt in LA.
I think Philly's probably the destination that I think makes maybe not my favorite, but makes just the most sense because he's got this sick role there where he's the primary 3-point shooter. Do they add somebody else to kind of knock him down a peg? Maybe, but as of right now, he's still the best 3-point shooter on that roster. He gets a lot of volume. He gets a lot of touches. He's a crucial part of that team. He might just like his role there in general. As you mentioned, Nick, I mean, he's bounced around. He's played with Orlando. He played with Milwaukee for a little bit. Then the Clippers and Philly. Maybe he does want to just kind of stay put for a while. So maybe that's another reason why he stays to Philly. There's a part of me that thinks that the Pacers and Nets, both who have had interest in him in the past, maybe they go back after some 3-point shooting. But I think Philly just makes the most sense. I don't think, a lot of teams are going to be. I just don't think there's a lot of places that he wants to go necessarily at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think Philly retaining him makes a lot of sense. Jeremy mentioned LA in terms of Clippers. I think it's less likely he goes there because I'm not sure that ended necessarily amazing. Obviously, a lot of the guys are gone. But if the Lakers went more of the role player route and they were looking to just add, spacing, and that's obviously what LeBron needs, that would be a possibility. Then, like Kory mentioned, the Nets and Pacers, I could possibly see it probably, but both those teams already have kind of really good shooters and they kind of locked up money in them. I think JJ Redick's going to probably end up either getting a little bit overpaid or end up in one of these championship teams, most likely being Philly. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with a lot of these guys, like we kind of talked about. Not necessarily your stars, but they can still start in your team and add a nice role off the bench if needed. Now, getting on to the other shooting guards, unless you guys had something else to add.
No, I'm good with that for JJ.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just going to agree. I mean, threw the Nets out there, but what do you need JJ Redick for when you got Joe Harris, Lumber Joe?
Maybe trading him though. Wink, wink.
I saw that.
But if they were to
that
trade,
would be so disappointing.
Trade Joe, it would be to most likely retain D'Angelo Russell or something along those lines. I don't think it would be to acquire JJ Redick. Like if it was, then I'd probably cry. But that's for another day. Terrence Ross, Jermey Lamb, what do you think of those two guys? We'll cut through the last couple guys fairly quickly. Just give me some thoughts on them, and we'll touch on destinations and possible contracts.
I was very surprised to see, how good both, Terrence Ross and Jermey Lamb, were this past season. Terrence Ross, both of them, made their way over, 15 points a game. That was, surprising to see. I don't think, and, obviously we watch a lot of basketball, follow a lot of basketball. I don't think I ever thought to myself, Terrence Ross and Jermey Lamb, really making leaps this season, and obviously in Orlando and Charlotte, I don't know that they, got quite the same, level of exposure. But I think I was pleasantly surprised to find out what competent basketball players, they'd both become. Um, it's very hard to pin down, I think, necessarily, where they're going to end up. I was, happy for Jermey Lamb's sake that finally I think he became, the player that they thought they were getting in the James Harden deal. But 7 years too late and in Charlotte, they have, some requisite skill sets. Terrence Ross, I think, is the better 3-point shooter. And really shot a lot of threes this year at a good accuracy. When I saw that he was putting up 7 threes a game, hitting 38% of them, I mean, that's a guy who, is someone you have to respect from deep. Absolutely. It's I think perhaps a little too late in his Orlando experience. He was injured a lot there. And finally pulled it all together, I think, just in time to be a free agent. I don't know that they'll want to try and bring him back, but they'll be somebody's backup plan, each of them, I think, in the coming off season.
Yeah, I mean, both of these guys, I'm fairly high on. I mean, Terrence Ross, I thought was electric this year as a 6-man off the bench, as you mentioned, 3-point shooting wise, shooting 7 a game, shooting 38%. Obviously, his best year, averaging 15 points per game. I think he's a guy who's going to be a 6-man somewhere. We're obviously always talking about guys who can be 3-and-D like. I think Jermey Lamb is a little bit on the weaker side. Well, Terrence Ross probably is the weaker defender between these two. They're not great defenders. Obviously, they both focus more on the offensive end. And then looking at Jermey Lamb, I mean, he became the clear-cut number 2 option alongside Kemba Walker, which isn't saying much on that Charlotte Hornets team. But averaging 15 points per game, a career high, shooting 44%, 34% from 3, in a bigger role, I think, and being 26. I mean, you got to like where both these guys are entering pretty much the prime of their careers. They both are set up to be really good role players for a lot of teams that are looking for really good role players.
Yeah, I think I like both guys in probably a 6-man role or similar to the other guys, low-end starter. Terrence Ross comes off as a little bit more streaky, but then when you look at Jermey Lamb a lot through the season, felt like he'd have really big quarters and then die off the rest of the game, or vice versa, be not very quiet for the first 3 and pop off in the fourth. He had those big shots against the Raptors, obviously. Both guys are interesting, and I think they can give you a nice scoring punch. Both guys, like Kory mentioned, could improve defensively, but they probably both have the tools to be better defenders. So they just kind of put the effort in. So I think it'd be interesting for any team to really grab these guys. What would be some destinations, and what type of contract do you think they're going to land?
As Kory mentioned, that they are coming on to the market at the right time. Being I think 26, maybe 27, each of them respectively. So they definitely are hitting the market at a good point in time. As far as where they can end up, remains to be seen. If this kind of spike happens more because they're laboring a bit of obscurity in Orlando and Charlotte, and if that sort of play would transfer effectively to a bigger market and a better situation. I think the Charlotte money woes are such that it would be tough to bring Jermey Lamb back on any sort of contract, especially when you have like Malik Monk, who's waiting there in a fairly high draft pick and trying to get more minutes. That can you throw more of Michael Jordan's money at Jermey Lamb when so much of it is tied up in any number of people who's it makes me sad just to think about how much money they make for being terrible at basketball. So I think Jermey Lamb is likely to to find a new home. As far as where those homes are going to be, depending on what happens with Danny Green. Toronto might be in the market for a new shooting guard. I mean, they had moved on from Terrence Ross. I don't think they would bring him back, but maybe Jermey Lamb ends up there. Terrence Ross maybe finds a new home in Philadelphia if JJ Reddick doesn't decide to end up there. I think he'd be the choice over Lamb because of his 3-point shooting. So those would be some opportunities with really good teams, to see if that those skills translate on a larger stage.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been saying the same teams over and over again when we go through this. I mean, for Ross and Lamb, both those guys, I think make somewhere is probably between 8 and 12 million. I could say maybe Jermey Lamb getting a little bit more. Maybe he gets 13 million. But again, I think not a lot of guys are going to be putting a ton of money into these role players, especially if they want to play on a contending team. And again, I think Philly would be looking if possibly it fits in their price range. The Lakers, of course, if they go the role player route. I think the Pacers would be interested in bringing one of these guys for scoring purposes. Clippers, maybe. I mean, a lot of teams are looking for role players. Both these guys fit into. You mentioned the Raptors, and maybe they lose Danny Green. These guys are the commodity of this offseason.
Yeah, I would say I have Jeremy Lamb probably making a little bit more money. I think you feel a little bit more confident for him. And like Kory mentioned earlier on, he was pretty much the second scorer in Charlotte. Now, on another team, he's not going to be your second scorer. He's going to probably be your sixth man, or like we talked about, a low-end starter or something like that. So his efficiency probably goes up because the pressure's just not quite there. So I'd be a little bit higher on Lamb. I think he'll probably get maybe 10 to 14. And then Terrence Ross, I think, probably 10 to 8 to 12. Like you kind of know what you're getting with Terrence Ross. I'd be scared to give him money. I'd probably feel a little bit better giving Jeremy Lamb money. Just like Terrence Ross can go from having a really good season then to a really bad season. Not that Jeremy Lamb's this amazing shooting guard, but I just feel more confident in his skill set and his ability to drive a little bit more and just stay more aggressive in terms of attacking, where Terrence Ross gets a little jump shot happy.
No, he definitely does. Jeremy Lamb seems to, have a slightly stronger track record. I mean, the Terrence Ross season definitely jumped out to me as more of an outlier in terms of his, performances. But, it's you feel bad a little saying the same, few teams over and over again. But, the teams that need, some help in their backcourt and, need some scoring on the wing are the teams that need scoring on the wing. So, it's not surprising to think that the same the usual suspects come up whenever we're thinking, well, who needs a shooting guard, who needs somebody who can hit some threes, and who's not gonna have a max slot available. So it's going to be kind of if you can call a $10 million contract scraping the bargain bin, it's a question just of when the music stops, who's going to be in which chair.
Yeah, I could see both guys actually too going to one of the non-contending teams, one of the younger teams, maybe offering a little bit more money. These guys are also looking for a role to kind of expand a little bit, and they don't want to just sit on the bench of a contender, at least I'm guessing.
No, there are definitely some teams that might be more in an up and coming type of place. I mean, it I think unfortunately works out that a lot of those teams have some solutions on the wing. For instance, I was for the OTG free agency series, I was thinking about where Thaddeus Young might end up. Now that he's coming off his contract with the Pacers, and I thought to myself, now that Harrison Barnes is inexplicably deciding that he wants to be a free agent, there's a lot of opening in the Sacramento front court. Maybe he's the type of guy that finally gets them over the hump into the playoffs. He can contribute to that picture, but their backcourt, is totally set. And the Pelicans obviously are going to be a very exciting team very soon. But all of a sudden, their backcourt, seems very well set if they don't, move on from, Ball or Hart or Holiday. So, a lot of those teams that are maybe on the cusp of, breaking through into the playoffs are also at the same time the teams that, have, holes in the front court instead of in the back court, and that doesn't, line up with what Lamb and Ross are up to.
What do you guys think about any of the other free agents? How about like Thomas Satoransky? Restricted free agent, most likely Washington retains, I would assume, but he's an interesting player.
I mean, he definitely showed more, this year in spurts than he had in the past. But I don't think he's, setting anything on fire, especially as a restricted free agent. somebody's going to have to, as it is with restricted free agents, you got to kind of blow the their retaining team out of the water with an offer and hope that they're not going to match it. And I don't know who decides that, especially with the way that you have to tie up your cap space for that amount of time, that somebody's going to want to tie up, cap space actively, for someone like, Satoransky, who is fine. Has done some interesting, stuff, but, is not a difference maker. When we talk about some of these guys being maybe 6s or 7s, I feel like he's, nowhere really better than an 8 or a 9. So that's not going to, get too exciting for anybody that I can tell.
What was the initial question? Where's?
What do you think about Thomas Satoransky?
Okay. That's what I just want to make sure. All right. I mean, restricted free agent, right? So probably ends up back in Washington. Really stepped up with John Wall going down as a playmaker. Actually, we really saw his game take another level when John Wall went down. Obviously, restricted free agent all the same. I actually like him probably more than I like Jermey Lamb and Terrence Ross, which I don't know if that's a hot take. But again, I mean, a guy in playing situations, they could use him because he can kind of play a 1 to 2 guard range. He's a little bit taller, so he could cover some threes. I think he's a solid guy, but we probably don't see him leave Washington, right?
Yeah, I think he probably stays in Washington. I think I like him maybe a little bit more as like closer to a 1 offensively, has a size as a 2. Obviously not an elite athlete, but he can play make for you. I think sometimes an issue for him is he's not aggressive enough in terms of scoring. And that would kind of holds him back a little bit. I don't think he leaves Washington, but if he did, I wouldn't be surprised if a team wanted to kind of grab him up because he does have some nice versatility at that size. But naming a couple other guys, tell me if anyone sticks out. Wes Matthews, Reggie Bullock, KCP, Austin Rivers, Rodney Hood, Wayne Ellington, Seth Curry. Who do you like out of that bunch?
The one that, kind of sticks out the most for me is Seth Curry. I think he really, showed us some stuff. This past year, it was really unfortunate, that he lost his entire, 2017, 2018 season, to injury. And he wasn't quite back to where he was when he was actually, starting kind of half the season for Dallas the year before and really, showed some mettle. But, Seth Curry, he can shoot. He's got a little bit of swagger to him. He's I think the type of guy that now that he got some, real opportunities in the league and showed that he can play and that, he's an impactful player, that he's going to be attractive. Obviously he's got the bloodlines. Seth Curry is very, interesting to me. I'll start there.
A lot of these guys' names popped out to me. Rodney Hood, after the postseason he had with the Portland Trailblazers, really liked him. Big clutch time shots in one of the overtime games. Wayne Ellington, I thought he looked very good in his short little stint with the Detroit Pistons. Obviously a 3-point shooter. Seth Curry, as you mentioned, Jeremy, shot well above 40% this year. KCP is interesting. Obviously, the guy's really streaky. But he actually did finish last season kind of hot. But again, everyone was not playing. There was a bunch of guys hurt. So he was just getting a high volume amount of shots. Reggie Bullock obviously didn't fare too well as a Laker, but he still got that 3-point ability. All of these guys are going to be crucial signings to wherever they end up in the regards to all of these guys can provide 3-point shooting, which is what it seems like every team that wasn't good enough to win a title, compete for a title, was lacking that 3-point shooting.
Yeah, I think you look at all these guys, at least, in my eyes, you look at Reggie Bullock, Wayne Ellington, Seth Curry, all good 3-point shooters. Like Kory mentioned, Bullock didn't do well with the Lakers, but his career numbers are very nice. Wes Matthews was nice with the Pacers, but he's definitely, you could tell the age is kind of
can't shoot, really streaky, like far streakier than I realized when he was with Dallas. But because he comes in and he's a very good defender, but can't make a layup first off, and then the 3-point shooting, it's just not there. The Achilles injury from a couple of years ago has really hurt him.
I was just about to say that. He was really a good player pre-injury, and he's just never gotten back to where he was. When they talk about troubles that people have getting back from Achilles injuries. Wes Matthews is right near the top there. He just isn't I think an impactful player anymore. I think he can provide he can fill a role, but there are a few people who I would take before I'd make my way down to Wes Matthews. And and as for Rodney Hood, who you kind of led with there, and his performance in the playoff, Rodney Hood goes to the Jeff Green school of tantalizing physical gifts. He'll excite you every fifth game and then let you down for the rest of them. I made the mistake of getting excited when he went to Cleveland, but for a guy who is as good as Rodney Hood can be, he had all the opportunity in the world to blow up his stats on a bad team, and was entirely uninterested. Rodney Hood is on my he's on my list of not interested.
Buyers beware. Yeah, I would say like I was going to with Wes Matthews, KCP, Rivers and Hood. You're kind of unsure what you're going to get with because they're so streaky. You're looking more so at Bullock, Ellington, and Curry. You could see these guys all have an impact. They at least provide you spacing. Bullock, when healthy, is a solid defender. Ellington can light it up and very good at contested threes. And Seth Curry obviously had a really nice playoff. So I think those three guys could be nice pieces for, a championship or a high-level playoff team to add to their bench if they don't necessarily have a ton of money, but maybe they have just enough to grab one of those. Anybody else shooting guard-wise that we didn't touch on you want to mention?
I can't think of any.
I mean, you rattled off a bunch of names there. I don't think I was, thinking like, oh, I can't believe that you didn't mention.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much we've summed up most of it. Shooting guard's not necessarily the strongest class other than the top two, and then both those guys are probably staying. So if you're looking for a shooting guard, not necessarily a great position for you, probably more available on the trade market, but that's for another day. Kory, Jeremy, always fun talking basketball with you. Obviously, thank everybody for checking in. iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, Dash Radio, and YouTube.
It was a pleasure, Nick. Let's do it again sometime.